friends, I'm Arpit and I'm here with today's analysis. Today is 6th of November and we're going to deal with one very important topic which is in news. This actually is very important. That is COP16 of United Nations Convention on Biodiversity. This was conducted in Cali, Colombia. The theme was peace with nature. Was it successful? Well, it was a mixed bag. The member countries agreed on taxing the companies who are taking data of the nature and earning money out of it. The countries also agreed to include the local communities which are there living in the jungles or living with the nature to be part of this convention of biodiversity, and this happened for the very first time. But on the other hand, a $200 billion commitment by the developed countries to be transferred to the developing countries annually for conservation efforts was inconclusive. It was not successful. So it was a mixed bag, some successes, some misses, and yes, the misses were substantial in itself. We'll be dealing with the MCQs based on this topic, and we'll be discussing the answers of MCQs of yesterday as well. Now, COP16 of United Nations Convention on Biodiversity. Now, some basics you need to understand first. So let's go to the blue board and we'll see the basics. Now, the year was 1972 when the scientists at the global level, were pressurizing a lot about climate change, global warming. So the global leaders in 1972 for the very first time met in Stockholm to discuss climate change, global warming and all. This meeting was on 5th of June. That is why 5th of June is celebrated as World Environment Day. This was the Stockholm Conference, the first global meeting of for climate change or global warming, we can say, or concern for the environment. But nothing substantial happened. 20 years down the line, 1992, the world leaders again met in Rio de Janeiro. And this summit was called as Rio Earth Summit. Here, three conventions were adopted. First convention, United Nations Framework to Combat Climate Change, UNFCCC. Second framework, United Nations Convention on Biodiversity, UNCBD. Biodiversity is simply, the diversity of the living organisms on our planet. Living organisms can be flora, they can be fauna as well. It includes microbes, it includes plants, it includes herbs, it includes humans as well. It includes animals. So more the diversity will be, better conservation of our environment will be. More vibrant the food chains will be. There will be more options. That is why it becomes necessary to conserve the biodiversity. We should not, allow to get the species extinct. Their population should not go down, their population should go up. And if their population is up, obviously the food chain will be vibrant, because the people who are preying on, let's suppose, any species, they will be in abundance. So the upper level in the food chain will be able to survive in a better way. They will be in abundance. At a layer above them, they will also be in abundance because their lower layer is in abundance. So that is the benefit of biodiversity. That is why I'm saying that the food chains will be vibrant. And on top of that, you never know any species, if that species has some medicinal value, and if that goes extinct, so we will be struggling as humans. So there was a need to conserve the biodiversity. And third was United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, UNCCD. Now, these three conventions, many countries signed. India is a signatory of all three. And these three, conventions started meeting at different frequencies, like UNFCCC met every year. Every meeting was called as COP. So this year, that is 2024, COP29 is scheduled, and this is going to be conducted in Baku, Azerbaijan. UNCBD, they started meeting with their own pace. They met once in 2 years. So this year, 2024, it was COP16. This was in Cali. UNCCD, this year only, it is scheduled as COP16 because UNCCD is also meeting once in 2 years. So this is the basics which you need to understand and know with respect to this. Now let us go to this. Now this meeting COP16 was conducted in Cali, Colombia from October 21 to November 1, 2024. India launched an updated National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, NBSAP, which we call it. And this NBSAP we will be discussing in the updated NBSPs which India has submitted. We will be discussing in, I would say, tomorrow's or probably day after tomorrow's videos. We'll see whenever we get the details about it. Then COP16 theme was peace with nature. Now, how successful was COP16 of UN CBD? It was basically a mixed bag. Some successes, some, I would say, fault lines were there. It ended in confusion and indecision on Saturday after almost 12 hours of negotiations. These negotiations stretched so much that many countries, especially the poorer ones, they could not afford to miss their flights. So they had to leave the meeting in between. And, that was the scenario, the actual scenario. So it was indecisive. What was the point which was being discussed? $200 billion, which has to be given by the developed countries to the developing and underdeveloped world every year for conservation efforts. That was the point of discussion. But unfortunately, that discussion did not conclude, I would say. Now, origin and previous COPs of UNCBD, we should also understand about this. Origin convention was opened for signature in 1992 after the Rio Earth Summit at the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. Rio Earth Summit it was called as. Convention on Biological Diversity entered into force on 29 December 1993. Its secretariat is in Montreal, Canada. Ratification. Ratification means after signing this treaty, those countries go back to their respective countries and pass it in their respective parliaments. CBD has been ratified by 196 nations, making it one of the most widely adopted international treaties. United States is the only UN member state that has not ratified the convention but has signed it. 1993 meeting, what happened over there? What was the outcome? It was basically, I think, Cartagena Protocol, legally binding treaty to conserve biodiversity. So treaties are legally binding only. CBD Conference of Parties is the governing body of the convention. This was decided. So COP is the governing body of this convention. COP1 was Nassau, Bahamas. Proposed 29 December as International Day for Biological Diversity. So in every COP, what significant happened, I've highlighted that. Ex-COP1, first extraordinary meeting of Conference of Parties. This happened at Cartagena, Colombia, February 1999 and Montreal, Canada, Jan 2000. Adoption of Cartagena Protocol on biosafety. Biosafety means, you know, uh, the biodiversity should not be harmed by any of I would say the harmful chemicals or any harmful emissions by the humans. COP5 Nairobi, Kenya. UNGA adopted 22 May as International Day for Biodiversity, Biological Diversity. International Day for Biological Diversity as 29 December was not adopted. 22 May has been adopted and it was adopted in the year 2000. COP5, which was there in Nairobi, Kenya, sorry. COP6 2002, The Hague, Netherlands. Global Taxonomy Initiative, Global Strategy for Plant Conservation adopted. COP8 2006, Curitiba, Brazil. Global Biodiversity Outlook, Report 2. Report 1 was published in 2001. Global Biodiversity Outlook Report 1 in 2001, 2 in 2006. COP10 Nagoya, Japan. This was significant because Aichi biodiversity targets were adopted in this and these targets had to be adopted by 2020. But unfortunately, no country was able to achieve these targets. Nagoya Protocol, access to genetic resources and fair and equitable sharing of benefits adopted. Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020 and Aichi biodiversity targets were there which had to be met by 2020, but no one, means no country, was able to meet these targets. COP11 2012 happened in Hyderabad, India. GBO3, that is Global Biodiversity Outlook third report, was published over here in this COP. COP14 Sharm el Sheikh, Egypt. Nothing substantial happened over here. COP15, that is the last COP which happened in two places. One was Kunming, the other was Montreal. and in two phases it happened. So phase 1, phase 2 we can see on the board. So phase 1 was in Kunming, phase 2 was in Montreal. We can consider it this way. And this was conducted in the year 2022, since it happens once in 2 years. So this year is COP16. So 2 years ago was COP15. The theme: ecological civilization, building a shared future for all life on Earth. That was the theme of last COP. It was held in Kunming, China, October 2021. Kunming Biodiversity Fund was created over here for conservation of the biodiversity. Phase 2 held in Montreal, Canada, adopted post 2020 global biodiversity framework. Pre 2020 was Aichi biodiversity target. Post were adopted in Kunming Montreal biodiversity framework. It is called as KMBF, something like this. 4 goals and 23 targets to be achieved by 2030. 30 by 30 targets were also achieved, were also adopted, not achieved. The goal is restore 30% degraded ecosystems and protect at least 30% of the world's lands, oceans, and coastal areas by 2030. No single country met all 20 Aichi targets, which expired in 2020 within its own borders, and in 2022, that is phase 2 of the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, or this is called as Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, KMGBF. This was adopted, and here were these 4 goals and 23 targets which have to be achieved by 2030. Now, the focus is this. Nobody achieved Aichi biodiversity targets till 2020. Okay. Countries should have learned from it, and now countries should be making efforts to meet these targets by 2030. And for that, the NBSAPs are being submitted, means those are action plans, what you intend to do to meet these targets. So the 23 targets, if I talk about, target number 1, biodiversity inclusive integrated land sea use planning should be there. Target 2 is ecosystem restoration should be there. Target 3, protect and conserve land and sea areas. Management of species and genetic diversity is target 4. Target 5 is harvest, trade and use of wildlife species. Target 6, invasive alien species should be tackled. Reduce pollution risks and negative impact. Minimize the impact of climate change. Target number 8. So reducing threats to biodiversity is the heading under which these 8 targets are there. Then from target 9 till target 13 are under meeting people's needs through sustainable use and benefit sharing. So biodiversity conservation does not mean that we stop using the resources of the, I would say, biodiversity hotspots or biodiverse areas. We should be using them sustainably. That should be the main, I would say, aim. Sustainable use for multiple benefits. The communities living over there, depending on the biodiversity for their livelihood, should be using it, but conserving it also. Target 10, sustainable management of agriculture, aquaculture, fisheries and forestry. Target 11, regulation of air, water, hazards and extreme events. Target number 12, increase access to green and blue spaces. Target 13, access and benefit sharing should be there. Next is tools and solutions for implementation and mainstreaming. Target 14, mainstreaming biodiversity. Target 15 is sustainable production, supply chains and disclosure of risks. Eliminate unsustainable consumption. Strengthen biodiversity, regulatory capacity. Repurpose harmful incentives. Resource mobilization. Target 20 is capacity development, technology and scientific cooperation. Communication awareness and knowledge management is target 21. 22 is equitable and effective participation in decision making. And 23 is gender equality in decision making and implementation. So these 23 targets, do you have to memorize? Well, you should not be having this photo memory of this, but yeah, you should be able to recall these targets. If you see any of these targets, you should be able to understand these targets. Okay. That is the main purpose of including these targets, these 23 targets in the slides. Now, key outcomes of COP16. Now, let's get back to COP16. What have been the key outcomes? The first is global tax on genetic data from nature. This is basically a taxation which will be there, and the money collected from these taxes will be collected in a fund known as the Cali Fund, since this fund is created in this COP16, which is conducted in Cali. So genetic data from nature, called digital sequence information, DSI, is increasingly used in products like medicines, but has often been accessed without payment. Those companies which are accessing this data are not, paying back. They're using it for free. Now, major agreement at COP16 was the decision to introduce a global tax on companies that profit from using this data. Criteria for companies will need to meet two out of these three criteria. First, sales over $50 million, profits over $5 million, and $20 million in total assets if that company has. Any two of these three are, eligible, or they are applicable to that company will have to pay tax if that company is using this genetic data from nature free of cost. Contribution to DSI fund, companies meeting these criteria will have to contribute 1% of their profits or 0.1% of their revenue to the DSI fund. Potential fund size could raise more than 1 billion euros, about $1.25 billion each year for nature conservation, and this is very important. Benefits to indigenous communities, at least 50% of the raised amount in the Cali fund has to be gone to the local communities which are there, the indigenous communities which are involved in conservation work of these resources. Indigenous and local communities permanent role in decision making. This was also very significant achievement this year which happened, that indigenous, I would say, people who were earlier represented via their governments now are directly represented. They do not have to be dependent upon their government to be represented. So they are represented directly, and since they are represented directly, so they can put their concerns across the table at the COPs, and this has happened for the very first time in any COP of any international convention. So inclusion of Afro-descendant people, the decision also includes Afro-descendant communities, people of African descent living in the Americas, giving them formal recognition in biodiversity decision making. But the failure was to raise $200 billion annually for biodiversity protection. Actually, one of the main goals of COP16 was to agree on a plan to raise $200 billion every year by 2030 to protect the nature. This target was adopted in the last COP, that is COP15, Kunming, Montreal. But, the procedure and all were not discussed, and it was decided that this is going to be discussed. Now, since it was inconclusive, so it has gone to 2026. 2026, say, if there will be only 5 years left. What will be, we are not sure whether we'll be able to adopt this in 2026 also or not. But yes, developed countries have a moral responsibility, and I think they are not able to understand that moral responsibility. The $20 billion pledge for poorer countries. Richer countries had promised to give $20 billion each year to help poorer countries protect biodiversity. But this goal was not met, leaving developing nations frustrated. Frustration from developing countries was quite evident. Representatives from countries like Sierra Leone expressed anger, saying that the governments can easily raise money for crises like pandemics and wars, but they are not able to raise money for conservation of biodiversity. This is something which is disheartening. No progress on new finance mechanism. Poorer countries, especially those in Africa and Brazil, were, you know, very much frustrated. The current system managed by the Global Environment Facility is seen as difficult to access. Global Environment Facility is basically hosted in the World Bank, dominated by the Western countries. So it does not releases funds to the developing and underdeveloped countries. That is why reforms are needed in those multilateral organizations which we've been talking about a lot. So this was there. No agreement on how to monitor progress. So we have set these 23 biodiversity targets which we saw. But are the countries really progressing on it? There is no monitoring mechanism. And since there is no monitoring mechanism, so there are chances that the fate of IT biodiversity targets can be replicated over here also. They were not met. Even a single target, even a single country did not meet those targets. These 23 targets have to be met by 2030, and since there is no monitoring mechanism, that can also be a possibility that no country meets these targets again. Aren't the countries serious about biodiversity, conservation of biodiversity and all? So that is something which is a big question. National biodiversity targets. Out of CBD's 196 parties, 119 countries submitted national biodiversity targets to help achieve 23 targets. So these are, national biodiversity targets linked with these 23 targets. NBSAPs, 44 countries have submitted national biodiversity strategic and action plans to support these targets. These are action plans that how the targets will be met. NBSAPs. India is one of those 44 countries now who has submitted their NBSAPs. New thematic action plan introduced to address inequities through capacity building, technology transfer, and knowledge sharing among the developing countries. Synthetic biology. What is this? Definition: synthetic biology involves using engineering principles to create new organisms or modify existing ones through techniques such as DNA sequencing and genome editing. So, Casper, Cas9 technology and all are there. Now, if these new kind of organisms are being created, they should be beneficial for the biodiversity. They should not be harmful for the biodiversity. That should be the main aim. Invasive alien species. Invasive alien species are those species which are brought from outside. They are not endemic to a particular place. And when they are introduced to a new place, they start negatively impacting that new place. Those species will be called as invasive alien species. They invade, and this, they are alien. They've been brought out from somewhere else. So they are alien. And the impact could be the impact is negative. Next is Global Action Plan on Biodiversity and Health. A global action plan was approved to address the emergence of zoonotic diseases, prevent non-communicable diseases, and promote sustainable ecosystem. One Health approach was also adopted. It embraces a holistic approach recognizing the interconnected health of ecosystems. So, the health of the ecosystems, the health of flora, fauna, and the health of humans, they are interconnected. Corona came to us from bats, it is believed. So, this is how One Health concept will be working. Funding requirements. To meet the future financial requirements for biodiversity initiatives, India emphasized the need for funding beyond regular government allocations. And that fund has to come from developed countries, obviously. Indian officials stressed that international financial support would be essential to achieve targets outlined in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Target 19 of KMGBF calls for mobilizing $200 billion per year for biodiversity, including $30 billion through international financing. Significant conservation initiatives. India highlighted its establishment of International Big Cat Alliance, which aims to protect 7 major big cats like tiger, leopards, or jaguars and all. The number of Ramsar sites in India has increased from 26 to 85. So in 2014, there were only 26 Ramsar sites. Now there are 85 Ramsar sites, and we have a target of increasing it to 100. So this is what India's efforts have been. Now talking about the MCQs. Which of these conventions were adopted in the Rio Earth Summit? United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, United Nations Convention for Biodiversity, United Nations Convention to Combat, desertification I've included twice. So we can consider it United Nations Convention for United Nations Convention to Combat Climate Change. This should be the right option. Take care. Now, out of these three, you have to find out which option is correct. Second is consider the following statements and mark the correct one. The Aichi biodiversity targets had to be met till 2020. Aichi biodiversity targets were adopted in COP10 of CBD. Only one, only two, both one and two, neither one nor two. Which country has signed the UN Convention on Biodiversity but not ratified it? It is a very simple question, straightforward. USA, Egypt, Japan, and France. Fourth question, consider the following statements with respect to COP16 of UN CBD and mark the correct one. Global tax on genetic data from nature has been approved. Indigenous and local communities' permanent role in decision making has been enabled. Only one, only two, both one and two, neither one nor two. Now, the discussions to the answers of yesterday, the questions of yesterday, sorry. Airbus has collaborated with which Indian company to manufacture C-295 in India? Reliance, no. Adani Defense Systems, no. It is Tata. HAL, Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, no. It was a relatively very simple question. 95 in C-295 stands for which of the following? The year in which C-295 was launched? It is not the correct answer. The weight of the aircraft, 95 tons. No, it is not the weight of the aircraft. The weight it can carry, Actually, the weight it can carry, it is 90, it signifies, but it is not 95 tons, it is 9.5 tons. So this statement is also wrong because this part is wrong, this part is correct. So the statement goes wrong. D is going to be the correct answer for this question. Consider the following statements and mark the correct one. India has a trade deficit with Spain. No, India has a trade surplus with Spain. Total trade is somewhere around 8.5 billion dollars, and India's exports are somewhere around $6 billion, 6 to 6.5 billion dollars, and Spain's exports to India are somewhere around 1.9 billion dollars. So India has a trade surplus. The year 2026 is declared to be the year of culture, tourism, and AI for India and Spain. Yes, this is true. So only 2 is going to be the correct answer for this question. Last question, consider the following statements with respect to appointment of CGI and mark the correct one. The CGI is appointed by the president, this is correct, on the basis of recommendations given by the collegium. No, the collegium does not refer CGI. The outgoing CGI refers who will be the next CGI. So this statement here is wrong. The recommendations for appointment of any judge of Supreme Court made by the collegium are binding on the government. Yes, they are binding, and this was the outcome of the third judge's case 1998, which happened. So this 2 statement is correct. First is wrong. Only 2 is going to be the correct answer for this. Now with this we come to an end of today's session. I will be meeting you tomorrow now with more such informative news pieces. Till then, you guys very well know what to do. Keep studying, keep reading, keep writing, and most importantly, keep revising. Namaste. Jai Hind.